All right, what is the purpose of thinking? So here's what I've realized, and it's that thinking has basically two purposes. So there's one that's effective and there's one that is less effective depending on your starting point. So the first one is one that I think everyone can agree with, which is that we utilize a thought process to plan things and build things and design things and create things. And that thought process is, if you really think about it, if you really consider it, is most effective when it's done in the context of writing something down. Consider, for example, an architect. If they were building a very complex structure like a skyscraper, it would not be very wise, I'm sure you'll agree, if they just held the whole idea in their mind, like every floor, every bolt, every structure, every column, etc. It would be much more wise to write it all down. That way, if they want to change something, they know what to change and what not to change. And as they add layers and add floors and add ornaments, for example, they know how much weight the walls can bear, etc., because they can go back and look at the structure that they're building. So that would be very difficult to do if you're simply doing it all in your head. If you're simply imagining it. And I mean, you would have to have a highly developed skill of visualization to be able to do that. And I don't think most people do. Although there may be rare exceptions where people do have that ability. So from that perspective, thinking, I would call that more consideration. It's when you're considering something carefully, step by step, and you're looking at the consequences of conclusions that you're drawing, you're questioning assumptions, you're looking at any reactions that you might have. For example, you might be even designing a building and saying, oh, I don't like that color there. But then you might question and say, well, why don't I like that color? Perhaps for the particular purpose of this building, that actually is the best color, even though I don't personally like it. When you go to a casino, for example, you might look at the carpet and be like, this is disgusting, but not realize that it's designed very specifically to keep you looking ahead and looking at the machines, and they have a whole design for it. So you might not have put that carpet there, but then you probably wouldn't make any money if you owned a casino, if you were designing it. So there's a lot of consideration that goes into these things. So that's the first form of thinking, what I call consideration. The second form is what you do in your head where no one else can hear it but you. And this would be more like judgment or self-judgment or comparison. So when you're thinking in your head and you're comparing yourself to other people, you're comparing yourself to your ideal of yourself, or your ideal, or some experience in the past, or you are judging other people, or you're judging yourself, or you're comparing. That would be the other form of thinking, comparison-based thinking. So you have consideration where you're planning something out, and then you have thinking where you're comparing yourself. And this is the type of thinking that gets us into trouble, because again, for the same reason that an architect writes down a blueprint as they build something so that they can check all the details and question any assumptions and not make mistakes and see the consequences of putting something here and there, thinking in our heads, especially when we're comparing and judging, leads us into trouble because we don't consider, number one, the full consequences of what it is that the assumptions that we have, but also the conclusions that we're coming to in our minds. So for example, you can someone could say something and then you would react and not question why you're reacting, why they might have said what they said, that perhaps you're misunderstanding them, where the reaction's coming from in the first place. And what you'll notice, what I've noticed, is that reactions and feelings and emotions that come up in the moment of something, especially if in regards to someone saying something or someone doing something, they're like conclusions that we've already come to. It's like a conclusion, like, okay, I feel a certain way about this situation. It's like automatic. And then we believe that conclusion. We don't question it because we're not able to slow it down, because we're doing this all in our heads. And then what occurs is we essentially use then a thinking process to find reasons to justify why that feeling or that conclusion that we've come to is valid. So, for example, somebody might say something to you, and then you feel a certain way, and then you start arguing with them and basically manipulating the situation to get them to confirm to you that your feeling or that your thought process is correct. It's very rare that we would actually ask questions first. Unless there's no emotional attachment. Like, if you're not emotionally attached to something, or you have mastered the ability to slow that reaction down and ask questions in real time, which is most people have not, then you will then use a thought process to convince yourself that the way you're feeling is valid, instead of using it as a way to slow everything down, question why you're thinking or why you're reacting, stop the reaction, and then look at things again from a fresh perspective, from a neutral perspective, from a perspective of what is really going on here and what would be the best way to handle and direct this situation. And so that thought process of justification and comparison and judgment leads us into areas that cause more consequences, because then we say and do things that maybe we, in retrospect, wouldn't have said or done because we were attempting to justify a position that we didn't even question, and that in retrospect we might look back and say that that position was invalid. It wasn't actually who I am. It's not who I want to be. Case in point is, for example, a post I made yesterday. And in this post, there were some folks who were reacting to it, not understanding perhaps that I was joking, or maybe they did understand I was joking. Just parking here. Maybe they did understand I was joking, but it didn't really matter because they weren't responding to the joke. They were responding to the way they were feeling based on something within the post that triggered an emotional or thought response. So instead of questioning the point and saying, okay, why is this person posting this? Like, maybe the conclusion I've come to immediately is not the conclusion that they were intending for anyone to have. Maybe it is. So you don't just automatically assume that you're wrong. That's not what this is about. It's about being self-honest. Like, okay, I'm reacting. So, for example, I like to make a lot of posts where it can be interpreted either as a joke or as taking it personally. And my jokes are usually, I mean, there may be exceptions where I've done otherwise, but generally I would say 99% of the time, unless it's 100%, which I'm not sure. But most of the time, the jokes that I make are not personal. And if they are personal, it's more like as at a celebrity or something that everyone's already talking about or something. So I don't make them generally personal to, like, you know, like someone, a friend on Facebook or something. I wouldn't do that unless it was specific to make a point. But my point is, when I make posts like that, what I'm doing is I want to trigger reactions in those who would react. And for those who wouldn't, that it's not a problem. It's just a funny joke. Like, it's something that I find funny. I like to poke fun at things that no one wants to talk about. Like when the election was occurring. And a lot of people actually were talking about this, so it was almost like okay to do it. It wasn't even that big of a deal. But, you know, poking fun at racism and sexism and things like that, because we've become so politically correct in our thinking and our language, you know, due to cultural programming and due to brainwashing and due to education and so forth. There's a very specific, I would say, agenda going on there to try to control speech and to control thinking in a certain way. And we have become so politically correct, meaning, and what I mean by political correctness, now there's a specific definition, but when I say it, what I mean is, you know something is true, or you see something. Maybe you don't know if it's true, but you see something, and you are considering something to be the case. And you don't want to say anything. You don't want to say it out loud. You don't want to express it because you're afraid it might offend someone, and then in that point of them being offended, they would attack you, and they would make you feel ashamed. They would make you feel guilty for saying what you said. And they would attempt to get other people to attack you and to shame you and to publicly, denounce you and to potentially impact your livelihood, impact your ability to make money, your ability to build relationships with other people. Because if you're labeled, as like, say, a racist, then nobody wants to be associated with you because they don't want to be labeled a racist. And it's that whole concept of guilty by association. The same thing goes with sexism and all this stuff. The thing is, the people who really run things in this world, and when I say run things, I mean the people who are operating at a level where what they do actually makes a fucking difference, unlike most of us, those people don't really give a shit what anyone thinks about them. They really don't. Like, they'll say whatever the hell they have to say. And they might be specific within things they say publicly, but it's not what they're thinking, and they don't really care about offending anybody. They're just more looking at the result and the consequence in terms of them having more power and control. And so it's really actually not different than what anyone else is doing, because the reason why you wouldn't say something that you really truly think, or that you actually believe, or that you actually see, right? Because ultimately your beliefs and your thought process is just opinions. But if you see something directly and you're afraid to share it, it's because you're trying to protect your ability to influence and control your environment. You're wanting to protect your ability to make money. You're wanting to protect your status. You're wanting to protect your relationships. You're wanting to, and sometimes, it is wise perhaps to do that, because we do live in a world of competition. And if you do something that puts your life at risk, or another person's life at risk, then that's not okay. Because I'd rather be alive and here and able to find a way out of a situation than dead and not be able to do anything. So you do have to use discernment, and I realize that. But a lot of times that fear becomes a point of total obsequiousness, if that's the right word, total just submission, total just going along with whatever. And that really doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't even serve those who you would be attempting to not offend, because they just continue in their delusions. So it doesn't really actually ultimately help anyone. And the thing is, it's easy to consider these points, because if your starting point is to do what's best for everybody, if your starting point is to do what you can in your individual life to end suffering and to end unnecessary death and unnecessary suffering of children who come into this world and have no skills, no ability to stand up for themselves, if you are coming from that starting point, then what is there to fear exactly? Why not shake things up in this world? Isn't that what Jesus did? Isn't everyone act like they admired Jesus because he went to the temples and turned the tables over? Like, how hard was that to do? He could have been arrested. Okay, so what? Like, what are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of standing up and speaking up? Or maybe you just don't care. If you don't care, there's not a lot really you're going to get out of listening to someone like me talking, because if you just genuinely don't care and you don't want to care, then you're just part of the problem. So there's nothing that anyone can do about that except you. You have to ask yourself why you don't care, and if it's really that you don't care, or if it's just that you've been so conditioned and you've accepted so much self-deception that you just don't know what anything can be done about it. And that's a different story. That's just a matter of peeling the layers of the onion to see that something can be done about the problems in this world. The thing about thinking that I've been realizing and come to realize is that it leads us into places where the conclusions that we draw are not based in reality. So it'd be like planning out a space station in your mind, but you don't even know how physics works. It's like you ever seen like a 5-year-old's drawing of like a spaceship or something? It's like, or a plane. It's like not aerodynamic, And I know that's not the point of what they're doing. They're not trying to make a plane, maybe. But what I'm saying is that's like what we do as adults. Oh yeah, no problem. I wish I knew how to pronounce your name. I'm assuming it's Ikram, but if I said it incorrectly, then forgive me. But the point is, when we think about things, it's very easy to come to... It's not easy. It just is likely that we'll come to conclusions that do not work in physical reality. And we also come to conclusions that have nothing to do with reality. So it may not be that you're using your thinking only to create things and then creating incorrect designs or flawed designs, but you would perhaps look at a post that I've done and not realize that my intention was to make a joke. But again, as I said earlier, I like to make posts that can be interpreted either way. And so Aaron Red said it perfectly, which was the way you interpret it is more based on you, not me, the person posting it. Although I do have a certain intention, but I'm telling you what my intention is. My intention is to make a joke that I think is funny. You may not think it's funny. That's okay. I think it's funny. I think it's something that's funny to say out loud because it would either people would laugh at it and say, you know what, that's so true, like, oh my gosh, because that's what comedians do. And I'm not saying I'm some skilled comedian, but comedy itself is just talking about things that no one else wants to talk about, that everyone else is thinking about. You know, like Jerry Seinfeld, his like classic joke that everyone knows is when he's like, you know, what's up with airline food? You know, what's up with that? Because he's like, airline food is so shitty, and how can we feel so grateful? Like, I'm having a meal on a plane. Oh my God, thank you so much. Like, I'm so grateful. It's like, but it's crappy food. Like, why couldn't they make it better food? You know, it's kind of like, it's a funny thing because we're all kind of thinking it. Louis C.K. does the same thing, and he's even more extreme. Like, he says things that are very politically incorrect, but it's like he's saying what everyone's thinking, or you might have thought at some point, and pointing it out. And a lot of really great comedians do that. George Carlin, Dave Chappelle, etc. So when I make certain posts like that, it's like, I think it's funny. I don't really care if you think it's funny. Because if you don't think it's funny, then at least you'll react to it. And then people, what I see happening, and this is just my understanding, so it may not be 100% correct, but I'm just sharing what I see. And you can take a look at it and be like, yeah, that makes sense, or it doesn't make sense. But a lot of times I notice people who react to something, they're actually just judging themselves based on what the post is sharing or the pictures or whatever. Like, they have a judgment. But then it's like you don't want to face that self-judgment and realize and just be honest with yourself, I'm judging myself when I shouldn't be judging myself, or perhaps I'm seeing something that I can improve upon. But it's like when you don't want to change, perhaps, you then attack the messenger, right? It's like you attack the messenger. So it's like a king in a castle, and the messenger arrives and said, King, the enemy's at the gates. They're about to tear down the wall. Like, they're loading up their trebuchets or whatever. And the king is like, how dare you come in here with that kind of news? Kill him. Get him out of here. You know, it's like, how does that help you? You know, clearly this messenger is sent from the enemy to confuse us. And you because you're reacting because you're afraid. You don't want the news to be true, but then you use thinking to justify why it's not true so that you can then get rid of the situation because you don't want to take responsibility for it. Right? So I made a post last night, about Gen members, which I am a Gen member. I've been a Gen member for quite some time, and I'm going to the next Gen event, so I'm a Gen member. And I made a post about, it was like a joke that I thought was funny about I put different pictures of people, like one guy wearing like some ridiculous outfit that was just like from some fashion show, which would probably be considered high fashion. So I don't see why people are reacting to it. If you think it's negative, that's on you, because some people would say this is like high fashion. And I put, that's a level 1 Gen member. And then I put like a kid with like clothes that are too big was level 4. And then like level 5, it was like a perfect, you know, like black suit, red tie, like by the book, you know, because you've already taken the level 5 test. If you understand Gen, you understand the joke. And then level 6, the guy was like James Bond. And then level 7, it was like a wizard. And level 12, it was just a ball of energy. You know, the whole joke of everything's energy. So it's like you get to a certain level, we just become pure energy. And then like level 13, I put level 13 member, which there's no such thing as level 13. But I put this dude in an orange prison jumpsuit with like handcuffs and like a ball and a chain. And he's like looking up at the sky, like kind of like laughing. It was like a laughing. It wasn't like he was sad. He was laughing like, oh shit. Like I did such a good job that they put me in jail. Like I challenged the system so much they put me in jail. And people are reacting to it. And like some people are laughing. And I can see based on who's laughing and who's pissed off about it, who gets it and who is just judging and who is like in fear. And it's funny because that'd be like if I talked about the fact that Jesus died, like he was crucified for what he said and what he was doing. And people are like pissed off about it. It's like, but isn't that the whole thing? Isn't that like the source of pride within Christianity? Is that Jesus died for our sins, that he died for what he came here to show, like he was willing to die for it. And like the person who created Jen was willing to go to jail and suffer the consequences of saying something that he knew no one wanted him to say. Why is it a negative thing? Why is it not okay to joke about these things? So if you are reacting to it, you're fucking uptight as hell. And that's why you're not creating anything in your life that you want, because you're not even understanding the basics. Feel good now. You know? And if you're not understanding the basics of feel good now, which also is feel bad when you feel bad, but then really examine it. Don't dwell on it and like just don't dwell on it and then use a fucking thought process and words to justify it, because that's exactly what happened to those who reacted. Is that they looked at what I did, they didn't understand the joke within it, which is fine. I don't care. Like, I'm not looking for applause on my jokes. They're probably not the funniest jokes ever. I don't really care. They're funny to me. But they didn't get it because their starting point was they were probably already feeling upset about something. They're probably already feeling bad. They're probably already feeling like sad about that situation, let's say, that Kevin Trudeau is in jail. And they reacted to that and felt bad, which if you read the comments, you'll see that's what they're admitting to. And then instead of looking at that and saying, why do I feel bad? How come I don't feel good about this? Let me use my words alone. Let me go by myself to the side and figure out why I feel bad so I can transmute that, so I can let go of it, so I can turn it into focusing on what I want. Because as long as I'm feeling bad, I'm not focusing on what I want. And if I'm suddenly feeling bad in a moment because of a little picture that someone posted, what does that imply? Was that feeling bad created by the picture in the moment? Or was it already there and I have been ignoring it all this time because I have zero fucking self-awareness? And so the ironic thing is, one of the points that people were reacting to was me saying that these level 1 Gen members are like wearing these like ridiculous looking clothes. And it is ridiculous. I thought it was ridiculous. But in reacting to that and saying, how dare you say that level 1 Gen members are beneath you, which is not what I said. That was not the joke. That was not at all what was being said. That was your interpretation of it. But by saying that, what you're implying is that you think that a level 6 member is above you, or they think they're above you, when they're not. They've paid money and they've studied the material and they've gone through those levels and that's where they're at. It doesn't imply anything other than that's where they're at. Like if you're in 6th grade versus you're in 1st grade. There's nothing wrong with being in 1st grade. But when you're in 1st grade, you don't know algebra. And you haven't been exposed to it yet, most likely. Unless somehow you were studying it on your own. And if that's the case, that's fine. It's not a judgment. It's a joke. It's a joke about being at the beginning of something and being very enthusiastic and trying your best, but then not understanding that there's more to learn and that you kind of look silly, because I even still look silly all the time. And I think that actually is a very powerful thing, is to the ability to look silly and not care what anyone thinks about it, to look goofy. Like, I do not know how to dance. I think I look like an idiot when I dance, but I still do it because it's funny to me. And sometimes I look back at videos of myself doing something silly and I'm like, oh my God, what a dork. But it's funny to me. And I think other people would think, wow, what a dork. And if they're thinking, wow, what a dork, and they're laughing, then that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing in my opinion. I don't have the insecurity of, oh no, I don't want to look like a dork. Because sometimes I can look very serious and I can look very distinguished. And sometimes I can look like a dork. And that's, everybody can do that. You can look very refined. You can look very distinguished. You can look very high class if you know how to dress and how to hold yourself and how to speak and so forth. It's just a skill. And then you can look like a stupid, silly dork too. It's not a big deal. So it's interesting because the joke itself that I posted could be interpreted in many different ways. And yet people would react to it based on something within themselves And the ironic thing about it is that some of the people who react are not even Gen members, or they're not currently participating. They're not going to events. Like, I go to all the events, so I know when you're at the event or not at the event. And if you don't go to an event, that's fine. Like, there's no problem with that. Things come up in your life, or you have literally more important things to do because you're succeeding and you're being successful and you're utilizing the information and the principles to benefit yourself, and that's great. So there's no problem with that. I like the Gen events because of what they represent, and the fact that you're able to actually go and build relationships. And I know that building relationships with like-minded people is an important part of success. And so that's one of the reasons I go to all the events that I can. I've only missed one, and that was when my son, right before my son was born. So that was the decision I made to go. Not an excuse, but a decision that this is more important. My son being born and supporting my wife, through our natural childbirth, where she was not using any drugs and had very, very little support from anybody except myself and her, but it was mostly her, building her mindset and looking at who she was in relation to giving birth and having a child, etc. And so that was a point of a decision I made to stay there and be with her. And we made that decision jointly, and there was no guilt or negative feeling about it. The point of going to a Gen event is to derive benefit out of it for yourself. The point of being a Gen member is to derive benefit out of it for yourself. It is only $150 a month. Yes, it does cost $500 to join, initiation fee. But it's only $150 a month, continued membership dues. And if you don't get that value out of it, then there's no reason for you to invest that money. However, it's like anything where if you don't extract the value, then you don't get the value. If you don't take the value, you don't receive the value. If you don't give the value, you don't receive the value. It's a membership club. It's like I have a client, for example, who is a member of a country club here in Houston. It's $100,000 initiation fee, and I don't know what the monthly or yearly dues are, but it's probably in the tens of thousands, I would assume. But it's $100,000 initiation fee. And I'm sure the facilities are very nice. It's very exclusive. There's only like 325 members. George H.W. Bush was the person who inaugurated the golf course by hitting the first ball off of the first tee at the first day it was opened at the golf course at the country club and so forth. So it's very exclusive. But think about it. If everyone paid that money and then didn't go to the country club, no one ever showed up. So you decided to go to the country club and there was only one person, you and one other person there. You'd be like, what the hell is this crap? So the country club can have the best staff, and they can have the best events, and they can put all the things together, and they can put training together and events and all kinds of things, and have the most delicious refreshments and hors d'oeuvres. But if people don't show up and utilize it, then it represents basically zero value. So you get zero value out of it. But the reason why you would pay $100,000 initiation fee to be a member of a place like that is because George W. Bush, or George H.W. Bush, the original one, might be there. He might be playing golf that day, and you might get to rub shoulders with him, rub elbows with him. Rub shoulders. You can rub his shoulders. He might rub your shoulders, Oh, yeah, you know what I mean? But my point is, that's why you would be a member of something like that. It's not just, what people don't understand. You don't just join Gen to get the training and the information. Kevin Trudeau already said that it's all out there. It would probably take you a long time to sift through all the BS and to get all of the... I was trying to think of a clever play on the word BS, but I can't think of one. To sift through the stuff that doesn't work and get to the stuff that does work. I was so grateful to find Gen because I know all the books on sales to read, all the books on mindset and success. I'm not saying Gen is the end-all be-all of everything in this world, because it's not. But it is the end-all be-all, in my opinion, and in my experience, towards developing financial perfection within yourself. and to perfecting the ability to be successful in this world. It is a process for those who are not born with a silver spoon in their mouth, with an elite family and an elite environment growing up. It is a process to become successful. And it's important that you don't judge yourself or judge other people within that. And those of you who were reacting negatively to my post about the level 1 Gen members and the level 5, remember, understand, if you look at the full post, it's not just about level 1 Gen members. It's a specific point that was being made. It was a joke to point out something. But those of you who are reacting, it's funny because it's all level 1 members or people who quit Gen. People who quit. And if you quit, then you're a quitter and you're a loser. You shouldn't have quit. If you did. I don't know if you did. I don't have the freaking access to the logs of who's in Gen and who's not in Gen. But if I haven't seen you at the last 5 events and, you don't ever participate, I don't see you posting about Gen, I don't see you talking to other Gen members, then I don't know what you're doing. So forgive me if I make assumptions. But my point being that those who react to it are all people who haven't really walked through the whole process. And they're judging themselves for it. They're judging themselves for it when you shouldn't judge yourself. There's no reason to judge yourself. You should be grateful. And in fact, when you look at one of my posts and you feel negatively, what should you do? Well, if you've been applying the material and learning the material and you're at any level of unconscious competence, you would immediately say, I'm so thankful and grateful for this experience, and I know it's going to work out to my advantage. And the thing is, it will. When you react negatively, because you understand my starting point is not to harm you. My starting point is not to make anyone feel bad just for the sake of feeling bad. It's not a malicious intent. And if you look at all of my posts, and you look through it and you look at the context of who I am and what I stand for, you'll understand that it's not a malicious intent. But it is an intention of, hey, you want to feel good and laugh? Here's something that I think is funny. You might think it's funny. You might not think it's funny. But you could just laugh at how stupid I am for thinking it's funny and how dorky I am. And if that makes you laugh, mission accomplished. But if it makes you feel bad, it's also mission accomplished, because you're either winning or you're learning. You're either learning or you're winning. You're either learning a lesson or you're winning, meaning you're gaining some kind of result that you're looking for. You're getting one step closer to fulfilling your chief aim. And if you are feeling a negative experience and then you're effectively processing that negative experience and becoming stronger because of it, then you are learning, and therefore you are winning. And if you do not process it effectively, then you're just learning, which means you go into a time loop where you now have to face the consequences of your words. So there were some things said on that thread, and I'm not going to make it personal. I'm not going to give names, because the post speaks for itself. But there were some comments that were deleted, and so I won't mention who or what specifically, but there were some things that were said within those comments. I did not delete them, but I did end up deleting a few of my comments simply because since other people deleted theirs, my comments were now completely out of context, and there was no context, so there was no reason to have my comments there because they were only a response to the comments that were placed. That's the only reason I will delete a comment. If I say something that's stupid as hell, the only reason I would edit a comment is to put a word in there that was just missed, because sometimes I use the text-to-speech, or that something was misspelled and it didn't make sense. But if I say something that's stupid, I would then follow it up and clarify and explain or ask questions. Because it's okay to make mistakes. It's important that people see that it's okay, because everyone's trying to be perfect. Everyone's trying to present a perfect face. And I have fallen into that trap in the past too, of thinking that I have to present a perfect face for people to listen to me. But the thing is, no one is, and I already did a post last week on perfection and what it really means. So when I say perfect, no one is perfect, what I mean is no one is the ideal. No one is the ideal of what they would like to be. Because if they were, we would have an ideal world, and we don't, so the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. So, the main point to consider that I would suggest anyone watching this to consider is go back and look at my post, first of all, of the gym member levels. It's like people in different types of clothing. Go look at that post and look at your own reactions and look at what you think I'm saying. And then look at your own reactions and then ask yourself, what if I'm totally misunderstanding? And then ask yourself, what might Cameron be saying if he were thinking differently? What would be the starting point of someone who's posting this, knowing that this person who's posting it is a level 6 gym member, which doesn't... It's funny because when I said that in the comments, people were like, oh, you think you're better than us? I'm like, no, I'm just letting you know I'm in this club. Like, I'm not a level 1 member, meaning I've invested a lot of time and energy into this club. And I've been around for a while. And it's not that I know more. Although I do. It's not the point that I know more. It's the point that I have put a lot into it. And I am a local chapter leader. And when I say leader, I just mean I'm the one who organizes and makes sure that the chapter meetings happen every month. We have other leaders in our local chapter group who lead other points. So it's like I'm not someone from the outside who's a hater hating on Jen. I love Jen. I've been in it since before the whole thing fell apart and it went into receivership. And then there was a year period where there was no events, and we were still having local chapter meetings every single month here in Houston, Texas. And can any of you say that? And many of you quit during that period. And many of you have rejoined, and that's fantastic. But many of you haven't rejoined, and you may not see a reason to rejoin. And then you can utilize the excuse of, well, I don't want dipshits and assholes like Cameron Cope in a club that I'm in a club with. Fine. If you don't want people who challenge you and force you to, not force, but place environments and situations in a context where you can then learn from and grow from and challenge. Because I'm not always right. Sometimes I make mistakes. Everyone does. That's the process of learning, is that you make mistakes. But being able to challenge someone and challenge yourself, isn't that what you're looking for? I mean, think about it. What else? How much can you pay to have someone to consistently, constantly challenge you? Or is it that you don't want to be challenged? Or is it that your whole life, no one has actually challenged you, and now you're feeling uncomfortable, and you're feeling like you have to grow, and you're taking the path of least resistance, which is the path of least reward. The path of least resistance is the wrong fucking path. The path of least resistance leads you to the end result of being in the point where the system wants you to be, which is the path of which is the point of diminishment of you, which is the point of submission to the system, which is the point of oneness with the system, oneness with God. God didn't create you to be one with Him. God created you to be equal. He created you to be one, as in an individual, and to be equal to Him. That's why you're in the image and likeness of God. He did not create us to be subservient. He did not create us to be one with Him, meaning like dissolve our egos into the sea of all oneness. That is a trap. That is the system, which is a man-made creation, trying to get you to submit and not challenge it. That's the product of the education system. You have to understand you're being brainwashed. Being one doesn't mean the true definition, the true supportive best for all definition of being one is not being one in a sea of, like a droplet becoming one with the sea. That's not what is meant by oneness. What is meant by oneness is being one, being an individual. You can't imagine that God created you as an individual so that you could then dissolve your individuality and become one with God, because that's like saying God made a mistake. It doesn't make any fucking sense. You are an individual. There's nothing you can do about that. You are an individual. Now the point is, are you going to be equal to your full potential? Are you going to be equal to God, meaning in the image and likeness that you were created to be? Are you going to be loving? Are you going to love your neighbor? Someone made a post or a comment on one of my things, because I made a joke about a bumper sticker that I saw that said something. Someone said on their bumper sticker, "I love my church." And I just made a joke about it, saying, yes, but do you love all life equally as Jesus did? And someone commented, they said, no, and no one ever can. And I said, well then, if no one can ever love if no one can ever love all life like Jesus did, then why did Jesus tell us to love your neighbor as yourself? Why did He say that? Why did He say in Matthew that all these things and more you will do? Why did He say that if we were supposed to be less than? And so people will think that it's an arrogant point to say that you can be equal to God. But why would God place you on an earth in a place where there's apparently lessons to learn and then not want you to learn the lessons? Why would he want to be around a bunch of people who are inferior to him? Why would God create us in the first place? If God created us to be one with him, then why would he create us as individuals? So again, oneness doesn't mean one with, in the sense of like dissolving into just a conglomerate of all one big thing. You are one, you are an individual, but you have to become equal to your full potential, what you're designed and meant to be. And if you really consider all the words that Jesus said, he said to love your neighbor as yourself, to give as you want to receive. The kingdom of heaven is within. So what does it mean to become equal to the kingdom of heaven is within? It means to realize that this world that we live in could be heaven on earth if everyone treated each other as their neighbor, as they wanted to receive, and gave as they wanted to receive, and loved their neighbor as themselves. We could have heaven on earth. So what Jesus was saying is that the kingdom of heaven is within means the potential for the without to be heaven starts with what is within, and whether this within is heaven. And what is heaven? Heaven is when you don't have any judgment or comparison about your neighbor. It's when you're not thinking in your head about how fucked up they are, but rather looking for yourself and using your thought process not as a point of justification of conclusions you've come to based on a reaction. That was, if you're being honest, programmed into you when you were a small child and you haven't ever questioned, and you've now believed and used your thought process to justify instead of taking it apart. So the point of this video is to talk about your thought process being either used to support yourself to become more, to become equal to your full potential, or utilizing your thought process to justify your weakness, to justify your limitation, and therefore creating a hell. If Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within, he means that you can change what's in here, so that as you align that, with the without becomes what is within. And if you look at the without right now, don't look at your own immediate environment. Look at the world as a whole. Look at the suffering that's going on. Look at the starvation and so forth, and the suffering and the poverty and the deaths of children. I just posted an article here in Houston. A five-year-old girl was shot and killed last night. That shouldn't happen. That's a system that's doing that. There's people fighting for survival, selling drugs, getting emotionally reactive, murdering their spouse, like whatever is going on. I don't know the details of it. But that stuff is happening because of the system that we live in that everyone is accepting. That is the without. So what does that imply is going on within? What implies that what's going on within is that there's a hell going on inside. Because if there was a heaven going on inside, we would see a heaven reflected without. That is the true meaning of as above, so below, as within, so without. It's that whatever you see on the outside is what's in here. So when you look at these posts that I make and you see something negative, that is the negative that's inside of you. And you should be using your thought process not to argue with me and justify why your negativity is valid. You should be using your thought process to take apart that negativity and cure yourself, like in the sense of homeopathy, because understand, like cures like. So if you're seeing negative and you're feeling negative, let that negativity flow through you. Take it apart, examine it, question your assumptions, question your beliefs. And that way you can get to a point of equality with what you're really capable of and actually create that heaven inside. Create that point of really being able to love your neighbor as yourself. There's no reason that anyone should attack anyone on Facebook for something that someone says. There's no reason. Because if you're feeling hurt by it, you have to understand, look at it from a different perspective. That was not the intention of the post, and a lot of people didn't look at it that way. People that you look up to, if you go and look at the likes, people that you look up to laughed at it. People that you looked up to laughed at the picture of the guy with the prison robe or the prison garb saying level 13. Remember, they got the joke. You didn't get the joke. The joke is on you because you're allowing your emotions to get the better of you. You're allowing your pre-programmed response and whatever else is going on. That's not my place to decide what is going on inside of you. So if you're not judging yourself, then that's not what's going on. You have to be honest with yourself. But you can't say, oh, it's Cameron doing it to me. I'm sad because of Cameron. I'm mad because of Cameron. No. Cameron is just a mirror. Cameron is just another human being, just like you, who's expressing himself. And you have an opportunity to use that as a point to reflect off of. And now I'm hitting buttons on my car, which is making the seat squash me. Good morning, Eric. Anything to add? If you haven't seen it, Eric, go check out my post about the levels and like of the members. It's like a couple posts down, and look at the reactions that occurred. It's quite interesting. And man, some people deleted some comments, so I had to delete some of mine, but some of the comments were really nasty, like saying some real nasty shit, and I wish they were still up, and I can't get access to the deleted comments, unfortunately, but there's some very nasty things said that was very interesting. I wish they were still up there for people to see. But that's in the past. It's not something I can do about now. But it was quite interesting. So check that out and ask yourself, you laughed, right? Exactly. So again, I'm not looking for confirmation from people that it's funny. I don't care if you think it's funny. If you don't think it's funny, I think that's funny. I think that's funnier than if you think it's funny. My point is, it's an opportunity to either laugh or cleansing. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I see it. It's like homeopathy. Like cures like. So if you're feeling negative, I got to give you some negative. But I'm not actually doing this intentionally. The only intention I have is just to laugh. And I just unconsciously create posts that can be interpreted one of two ways. Either in a positive way, a funny way, or in a negative way. That's just the kind of sense of humor that I've developed. It's sort of a, what's the word? Irreverent sort of sense of humor, you know? And that, to me, is the funny stuff, like George Carlin. Like, watch George Carlin. Watch George Carlin, and then imagine, if you think it's funny, imagine people getting pissed off at what he's saying. And just being like, wow, what an uptight motherfucker, if you're getting uptight and pissed off at George Carlin making these jokes, right? It's like, maybe you should go listen to somebody else. Maybe you should go listen to, hey, Aline. I don't know if you're referring to the New Orleans video or not, or if you're referring to the level 1 and level up through level 13 gen member post, but that's the one I was referring to, is the level post. And I noticed some people really heavily reacted to that, so it's quite interesting. All right, I'm going to go because I'm here to meet Rocco so we can go walk and calibrate our day. It's exactly 8:30. Wow, what a coincidence. The universe is sending me a sign through my clock that it is now time to go. All right, everyone, I appreciate y'all watching. Okay, great. That's cool. See, that's why you're successful, because you're laughing. People say stuff all the time that offends me, but then I have to laugh about it, right? So that's, I think, when we're really starting to apply the training, is when we're getting to a point where even if we do react for a moment, we then realize that we're reacting, we forgive the point, and we don't hold a grudge. We just say, aha, that's funny. Like, I just reacted. I'm being silly. Like, okay, let's laugh. Let's have fun. Because if you are feeling attacked, then the question is, why do you feel attacked? What are you holding on to? What are you trying to defend? Because Kevin has taught us that if you're trying to defend something, if you're trying to hold on to something, that is when you're setting yourself up for a huge fall. Right? That's when you're setting yourself for a huge fall, if you're defending something, because then you're not growing. You're just trying to protect what you have, what you've built. But if you're afraid of it falling, that means you didn't build anything. It's not real. You didn't actually build something. If you're creating an image of yourself that isn't physical, it's not real, it's not valid in reality. Yeah, I do agree with you, Aline. I do agree with you that there's a point where you can push things too far. And I appreciate that feedback. The thing is, that's not my purpose here, is to judge whether people are being pushed too far. People decide what's too far for them. And that's why my posts are not public, so they're not publicly available. So for those on the outside who would not understand the context and get to know me and see everything I'm doing, it's not publicly available. And you won't see me doing things like that in a public setting necessarily where it can be taken out of context. Because context is always very important, is that we take things into context. So I do appreciate that feedback, Eileen, because it is a valid point of feedback. No. I'm not going to be late. I'm always on time. So I appreciate that. And place some comments here. For those of you who watched the video in its entirety, take a look at it. Give me feedback. Say what you think. Don't be afraid. Like, I might challenge you if I don't agree with what you're saying, but it's good to have feedback. That's the whole point of having a club where we can bounce ideas off of each other and express ourselves and fine-tune things and see how other people respond to what we do. Because at the end of the day, if people are not responding to what we do, then what are we doing? We're just wasting our time. All right, have a good one. Talk later. Bye.